Today on Aspiring Women, a teenager contemplates taking her life.
I started to think about how bad my life was and things like that, and eventually a train started coming.
Hi, this is Aspiring Women. It's good to see you. Okay, we're laughing because we're talking about the teenage years.
Yes, and they're not a laughing
so
matter.
funny at all.
I would not go back to that for anything.
No,
And
couldn't pay me.
I wouldn't go back to parenting teenagers either. Oh, please. My daughter had, in many ways, she had a charmed life,
Yeah.
but she still went through this place where she hit a wall, and I think most kids in puberty do that.
You know, and if we're not careful, we're not paying attention to that.
Yes,
we think,
that's true.
oh, that's just what teenagers do. But there's a lot of messages probably in those times.
That's true. And you were saying that, kids staying by themselves in their room and everything, that's not a good thing.
No, it's not.
No privacy till you're paying the mortgage, I always say.
I'm going to tell my son that.
And sometimes extra stressors come into a teen's
Sure.
life.
Especially now.
Especially now. Oh, my goodness.
Life is completely different from when we were teenagers.
That's the truth. And I think the teenage years for me zipped by so quickly, probably because of the extra stressors. I don't think I enjoyed it.
They're hard. They're hard on the teen and they're hard on the parents. But Kristen Anderson was a bright, happy child who thrived on friendships. The youngest of 3 children, she didn't have a care in the world until several unexpected tragedies shattered her life completely.
I didn't have a lot to worry about. I had everything that I needed, most of what I wanted. I had a great family, lots of friends. I loved playing soccer and hockey. I was very social, especially in high school. And I was very much a people pleaser, very much a people pleaser. I wanted to make everybody happy around me.
Like many busy families, Kristen and her parents would attend church on Sundays, but kept God at a distance during the week.
I really saw God as a very distant, faraway God. I didn't have any idea that he had interest or anything to do with the personal details of my life. So I didn't go to him for help or strength or understanding or peace or anything.
When Kristen entered high school, she became rebellious, which strained her relationship with her parents. It was during this volatile time that a tragic series of events began to take place in Kristen's young life.
First, one of my friends was diagnosed with cancer in her brain, and she died of a brain tumor. Then one of my friends died in a motorcycle accident, and then another friend died in a car accident, and then my friend Brandon killed himself. During the time that those last 2 friends died, I was also being stalked by 2 guys, and following that, I was raped by another guy.
It was at a party where she had been drinking, and the rapist was an acquaintance, so she never told anyone. Because of this and all the other tragedies, Kristen's naturally happy demeanor turned angry. Seeing this dramatic change, her parents realized she needed help and sent her to Christian counseling.
My parents took me all the real places that I needed to go, but it never, helped me the way that it could have. And I also, didn't want help, which makes a difference as well. I didn't want anything to be wrong with me. I was very prideful.
Denying that she had a problem and not accepting help, Kristen soon began to sink into a depression that was out of her control.
I just felt like life kept getting worse and worse and worse, and it was never going to get any better. I didn't talk about college. I didn't think about it. I didn't really think about the future at all. I had started smoking and drinking and just driving recklessly because I didn't value my life anymore. I was living my whole life pretty haphazardly and careless and recklessly. I was just hoping that my life was going to end and there wouldn't be a future for me.
Spiraling into depression, Kristen thought endlessly about her friend Brandon's suicide.
Being the people pleaser kind of person I was, I felt like I should have been able to do something to help him. I took a lot of personal responsibility for him taking his life. One time I was sitting in my bedroom thinking about how he did it, because he took his life in a very graphic way. He hung himself in a cemetery. And I just didn't understand how he could take his life to begin with, but most of all, why he could do it the way that he did it. And in that moment, as I was having that thought process, as I thought I could never do it. I could never do it, especially the way that he did it. And then my thoughts changed to, well, if I ever did do it, how would I do it? At that moment, I went through a lot of different things in my mind, and none of them I thought would be successful until a train went by my parents' house right in that moment as I was thinking about it. And it just snapped in my mind, that's one way I could never live through it.
You know, she says something very key. She talks about not expecting to have a future. And I think a lot of teens are in that place today. Now, it's interesting because her parents did the right things. They noticed that something was going on with her. They got her into counseling, but she was in a state of denial herself.
Well, and she did, excuse me, Sonia, but she didn't want to admit there was something wrong with her.
Right. You know, and you could go to counseling all day long, but until you open up and really talk about what's going on, it's a waste of time and money. Now, how long do you keep trying? As a mother, you know, you keep trying, keep trying, but when you see that it's not going anywhere, or sometimes it's frustrating the person you're trying to get help.
Well, Sonia, you are, you know, our poster child in a way, and I want you to share a little bit. But, you know, we as Christians sometimes think, okay, we can't let anybody know we're depressed because we have to protect God's reputation. And if I'm a Christian serving God, I shouldn't be depressed.
Right.
Address that
You know, there are several things I learned about depression firsthand. There is circumstantial depression. And I think Kristen's body was responding exactly as it probably should have in a fallen and broken world. It's a crippling time in her mind and in her spirit, all that she went through. If you change your circumstances, sometimes that does help begin to relieve the depression. But then there are clinical depressions that it's just not like diabetes, and you're just going to need some extra help. You might need medicine or more counseling, or you might need to really tell somebody what these thoughts are and these whispers are.
And it's not a sin.
Oh, absolutely not. It's not a sin. It's just something your body is going through, and it can be a great signal, you know, for your body. When we return, Kristen's depression does deepen, and it leads her to the center of a train track and to the brink of death.
Kristen Anderson was your typical teenager, involved with sports and friends. And then a series of tragic events, including the suicide of a friend, sent her into a downward spiral towards depression. Thinking she had nowhere to turn, Kristen made a split-second decision one cold January evening that changed her life forever.
I walked over to the park in our neighborhood because I didn't feel like I could go home. And I sat on these swings that I'd sat on many, many times in my life. I started to think about how bad my life was and things like that. And then I remembered that in the town that I grew up in, you're not supposed to be in the park after dark. And if you are, the cops will make you go home. I looked around and I saw a set of train cars that had been parked on the railroad tracks bordering the park. I knew that if I went there, they wouldn't see me that far away from the road. So I was sitting there continuing my thought process of how horrible my life seemed to be. And then I remembered that thought process I had had 3 months before when I was struggling over my friend Brandon's death, and about if I ever killed myself, how I would do it. And then I started really thinking, it's worth it, it's gonna get better, there's a reason I'm here. And then I would think the opposite, it's not worth it, it's not gonna get better, there's no reason I'm here. And those thoughts really went back and forth in my mind for about, I would say, an hour and a half. And I really think it was a spiritual battle, and I couldn't have recognized it as that then, but eventually a train started coming.
With the train rapidly approaching, Kristen stepped onto the tracks.
was just a fraction of a second. It was right before it got to me that I decided. It was completely impulsive. It was only a matter of seconds before it went over me. They could have not had time to stop. And I remember it all completely. When the train was going over me, I felt a wind kind of suck at me to begin with, and then it began to push me down almost into the ground. And because of the physics of how fast the train was going, I should have been sucked up like I first felt and pretty much torn to pieces. In the police report, it says that the conductor said to the engineer, "Did you see that yellow flash?" And the engineer said to the conductor, "Yes, I think we just hit someone." The yellow flash that they saw was my bright yellow coat that I had on. And so the police report also says that 33 freight train cars went over me at 55 miles per hour. The train stopped. I began to unclench my fist, open my eyes, and look around to try and figure out what had just happened, if this was even real. It seemed like a horrible nightmare. When I looked behind me to my right, I saw my legs 10 feet behind me on my right. And I knew they were my legs because they had these brand new bright white tennis shoes on them that I had just gotten for Christmas. So I used my arms to crawl out from underneath the train. And when I looked down at my left leg, I looked, and it had been severed so highly that I didn't see anything there. So I looked to my right leg, and it looked like it was gone right below the knee. Took my hand, and I had gloves on. I took my hand and ran it below where my leg had been severed, and I unintentionally brought that hand up to my face, and I saw all of the blood. And when I saw all of the blood, the pain really hit me because I knew that my legs were gone and I knew I was alive. So I started crying like I'd probably never cried before in my life, bawling. But in that moment, in that time when I was crying, I began to be pretty much covered with this overwhelming peace like I never felt before. And I started hearing the song Amazing Grace playing over and over and over in my head.
When the paramedics found she had lost so much blood, they couldn't believe she was alive. Conscious during the ambulance ride, Kristen was able to give the paramedics her parents' contact information. At the hospital, as they prepped her for surgery to reattach her legs, Kristen asked the doctor if she was going to live or die.
He told me he didn't know. And he really didn't know, but he told me that because he says that he wanted me to fight to die, fight to live. I just needed to fight. And so that's the last thing I really remembered. And I was in surgery all night long.
Kristen survived the night, but the surgery to reattach her legs was unsuccessful because of nerve damage. Her very distraught but grateful family was present when she awoke the next day, but her mind was still filled with many mixed emotions.
One thing I heard over and over and over again was, "Kristen, God kept you here for a reason. There's something you're supposed to do here." But at the same time, I was regretful that I lived. I never, ever thought that I would live through it. And I didn't want to live my life without my legs. So that was really, really hard for me. And people worried about that. They were like, if she didn't want to live her life with her legs, how's she going to live her life now?
Kristen's story brings back tough memories, I think, for me. It's not nearly as graphic and difficult as she's been through, but I remember sitting in the psychiatric hospital, never believing you'd be there, and having to tell someone all these voices and these ideas of not being in this world, how they come at you. You know, I heard sitting in the rehabilitation center with people who had suicidal thoughts or attempted it. And most often in that circle, you heard time and time again, I really didn't mean to kill myself. So it's interesting that Kristen truly did. She really intended to kill herself. And I thought that was powerful, what she said. Now, how will she want to live without legs? And that's incredibly true. I think you're just grasping at one little straw of hope, and at that particular time, she desperately needed it.
Yeah, but God totally saved her life, because isn't it amazing that she felt something push her down, and that she even survived
And even the ride
this.
to the hospital was phenomenal. What was supposed to take 45 minutes took 9. Well, coming up, Kristen wonders where she would have spent eternity had she died on those train tracks that cold January night. As a teenager, Kristen Anderson attempted to take her life by lying in front of a speeding freight train. By God's grace, she survived, but lost both of her legs. In the months that followed, Kristen wondered why her life was spared. She also wondered what would have happened to her if she hadn't survived. She got her answer when a visitor explained the gospel to her for the first time.
I asked him if he thought I would have went to hell if I died, and he shared that if I had never put my faith and my trust and personally asked Christ to forgive me of my sins and chose to let him lead my life, that I would have went to hell, and nobody had ever told me that in my life. So when I heard that night is when I became a Christian and realized that my life wasn't mine to take and it belonged to God.
She accepted Christ, but didn't join a church or have Christian friends for support. Without a foundation for her new faith, she continued to struggle with suicidal thoughts and depression for 3 years.
I didn't know that I needed to be in God's Word every single day and how much hope and wisdom and understanding and peace that would bring me. Strength as well. I had no idea how important it was to really be a part of a Bible-believing, gospel-preaching church, have Christian friends. The other thing was I didn't realize how real Satan was and that he still wanted to destroy me, and he would love it if I would try and take my life again.
Once planted in a strong church, Kristen began to take the spiritual disciplines to heart. Antidepressants helped her with the depression, but she was still searching for the reason God had saved her from that speeding freight train.
I knew God kept me here so that I could know him personally, but I wanted to know what he wanted me to do here. And so as I was thinking through that, praying with other people about it, I just began to find answers. And I was going to school for social work because I knew I wanted to help people, but I didn't know specifically how I wanted to help people. And then I felt led in the direction of full-time ministry to help other people come to know him in the awesome, amazing, personal way that I knew him.
Following God's leading, Kristen is attending Moody Bible Institute today as a full-time student and has also started Reaching You Ministry, a ministry started as a response to sharing her story so often. It's because of God's gift of a second chance that Kristen offers advice to those who are struggling. 6 out of 10 students consider suicide at one time or another. What would you say to them?
I would tell them that God loves them, that they're here for a reason, not to be afraid to talk to other people, that many people feel just like they feel, and that there's a reason they're here. There's so many things that God created them for. He made them perfect. They're not an accident. A lot of times parents think that their children are threatening suicide, and they don't know if they should take it seriously. And I always tell them to take it seriously, because most young adults and teens do feel depressed and suicidal at one time. They're trying to figure out what life is all about. So just, be understanding, be prayerful, and talk to your kids. Really ask those questions if they've ever felt that way, and expect to hear them say that they may have.
Kristen now teaches other young people a lesson she wishes she had known on that cold January night.
Jeremiah 29:11 says, "For I know the plans I have for you, not to harm you, but to prosper you, to give you a hope and a future." And even if I didn't have a hope for myself, God had a hope for me. Even if I didn't have plans or a future for myself, he had plans and a future for me. And if I would have known that, and I would have known that he could give me the strength, the peace, the wisdom, the understanding through the difficult things that I was facing and going through, that would have made all the difference.
Well, she did accept Christ, which is certainly a good thing that came of this.
She wasn't ready to go. Yeah.
That's right. But she wasn't instantly fixed. I mean, this girl had a long road ahead of her, and I think sometimes we expect people to just snap out of stuff, and this is a journey she's going to be on for a long time. But she had counseling. What is the importance of a support group? How important is a support group?
I think one of the greatest, absolutely, one of the greatest, testaments to the sense of community is AA. All these incredible incredible support groups, and people will tell you how long they've been sober. And depression is the same way. It is one of those things we're not talking about enough in the church. We're doing a great misservice to people when we think come to church and come to Christ and everything will be fixed.
Well, one of the greatest prophets in the Bible was depressed, Elijah.
That's right.
And God didn't fuss at him about it. He fed him and nurtured him and said, okay, make an appointment to get up. But for now, I will nurture you where you are and allow you to be restored.
Absolutely, absolutely. I thought you were talking about me at first. We'll be back after this with some final thoughts.
For helpful resources on today's show, visit our website at aspiringwomen.tv.
You know, the amazing thing is I tell people all the time, take your medicine. It's sometimes an issue of pride. And if anybody ever gives you any shame for taking it, tell them to take their girdle off and let the Lord suck that cellulite out. It is just
it's important.
It's absolute. Take care
it's
of
a
yourself.
physiological need, and
It's
you
a
have to
physiological-
understand
Well,
that.
you know,
There's warning signs everywhere. You know,
what are some of those red flags for teenagers? you
One,
think?
don't spend so much time in your room. If it's doom and gloom, if they're not making friends, or if they've isolated themselves from their friends, if
On
they're
the
changing
internet.
their activities, right? And the internet.
And the internet is it just tells you how to do it, for
That's
heaven's sakes.
exactly
It's
right.
horrible.
And you know, you always say pray for your kids, pray for your kids. But I always go, no, pray with them.
Yes.
They let them take their petition to God. Listen to their voice talking to God, and let them hear your voice talk very honestly and bluntly
Yes.
about them.
That's
you know,
important.
so there's no secrets between you and them and God.
Right.
You know,
That's
talk about
big.
everything. That
and
is
friends.
huge.
Get involved with their friends too.
Yeah.
Let your house be the place that's a haven
And
so
that-
that you know what's going on.
That sense of community that church can bring, the
Yes.
positive side of that. If you have a loved one that seems to be wandering in depression today, or you listening, you have found yourself in a dark place, don't be convinced that there's no hope for you. That is, there's a lie being whispered in your ear by the very dark that would love to destroy you. Push back on it.